Hi, I'm Nathan, and I'm here at Denver Health for Real World Apps Math. Okay, can you start out by telling us your name and your job title?
Sure, I'm Heather Young. I'm a physician at Denver Health. I'm a physician in infectious diseases, and I'm also the hospital epidemiologist.
What exactly is an epidemiologist?
An epidemiologist is someone who follows disease trends and helps intervene with them. So here at the hospital, what some of my jobs are is to follow trends in influenza, to follow our seasonal trends, and also to work on hospital-acquired infections and to try to prevent outbreaks and spreads of infections throughout our hospital.
So do you focus just on influenza, or is it kind of departmentalized based on different infectious diseases?
It depends on the season. Obviously, in the winter season, we worry more about respiratory viruses. Other times of the year, we worry more about other infections going around. But we always have a number of hospital-acquired infections that we need to look after as well. People, when they're in the hospital, sometimes will develop post-operative infections that we need to keep a close eye on and try to prevent. They also can develop pneumonia while in the hospital or develop urinary tract infections, and we work hard to try to prevent all those from happening. So one thing that I do each day is I follow disease trends. So I'm looking at data on the computer to see how many infections we've developed here at the hospital. Work with other staff members here at the hospital to try to implement these best practice evidence-based measures. Each afternoon I round on inpatients, on hospital inpatients, and help treat their infections.
Can you tell us a little bit about your educational background and how you became an epidemiologist?
So I finished high school, and then I went to a 4-year college, and after that I went to medical school, and I did 4 years of medical school. After that I went to a residency, and in my residency I studied internal medicine and pediatrics. And then I did a fellowship after that, and I spent 3 years studying infectious diseases.
What made you want to become an epidemiologist?
I really like studying trends in infections. All through medical school, what I was most interested in was microbiology and infectious diseases. And I just loved that I have a variety of patients and that I can cure these patients with the right antibiotics. I also have always been interested in preventive medicine, so really being a hospital epidemiologist, someone who can prevent infections and follow infections in the hospital, was a really nice fit.
Which math class would you say is the most helpful and just applicable in your job on a day-to-day basis?
I think algebra or algebra 2 are probably the most applicable ones to my job. I didn't take a formal statistics class until actually after college, but I also find the statistics class to be pretty helpful as well.
So can you tell us a little bit about some of the math that's involved in your job on a daily basis?
Yeah, so one of the ways that we use math in my job is by plotting infections over time. So we can use those graphs to determine where the source of the infection was. So for example, on this graph here, we have an exposure here at time 0, and then we have a number of people who developed the infection later on. And this one would actually be pretty characteristic for Ebola. What you can see here is the time from time 0, when they had the exposure, to 2 days later is the minimum incubation time. The time here from the exposure to the peak is 6 or 7 days, and that's the average incubation time for Ebola. And then the time from the exposure to 21 days would be the maximum incubation time. And the fact that it kind of stopped after 21 days would suggest that they all got exposed on day 0 here. In contrast to this, this is what we would call a propagated source outbreak, where there's an exposure that happens on day 0, and then a number of people become ill with this illness over the next 17 or 18 days. What happens then is that these exposed people expose other people, and even more infections occur, and then some of these people expose others, and even a larger curve occurs over here. And this one would be most characteristic of something like measles in an unvaccinated population.
So I understand you use a model called the SIR model. Can you explain kind of in layman's terms what that is and how it's used?
Sure. So the SIR is a standardized infection ratio, and that's used a lot of times in order to compare different hospitals.
So do you do a lot of collaboration then with statisticians and things like that?
Absolutely. We have a biostatistician who's on our staff and is really invaluable in terms of helping us to manage especially large quantities of data.
So since you do take a lot of statistical data and probably in large numbers, how do you take those really large numbers and just all that statistical data and relate them to somebody in non-mathematical terms so they can understand?
So I think it comes down to needing to have a really good understanding of what the statistic says, because if you don't understand it yourself, then it's extremely difficult to explain to someone else. So when I take the statistics, I like to just write it down, pencil and paper, and try to understand what's most important on this, and then share just the most important things with others.
So one of the things that most people are familiar with is flu season. So you always hear about like it's going to be a bad flu season. What goes into making those kind of predictions about whether the flu season is going to be particularly bad or just kind of a normal season?
So the way that people make vaccine is they study the influenza composition in the southern hemisphere, and then they create the vaccine based on those strains for use in the northern hemisphere.
Okay, so now for a more serious question, what would you do if you were the first person to discover a zombie virus that was going to wipe out all of humanity?
Well, I think that the first thing I would do would be to put the patient in a room by themselves and close the door, and then call for a lot more assistance.
Do you have a favorite math pun?
What snakes are good at math?
I have no idea.
Adders.
I should have known that one as a math teacher. I'm sure you're really busy every day. I really appreciate it and just want to say thank you for taking the time out to discuss a little bit about what you do and how it's related to math.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for coming out.
Thank you.
Subscribe!
Come on, push the button.
You know you want to.
I'll do it.